Tammy Ditmore is joining me now. Thank you so much. I know she's nervous because I kind of put her up to this, but Tammy edited my book. So how are you, Tammy?
I'm good. I am. I'll tell you why I'm nervous. I'm an editor. I work in the background. I stay back by myself, and I'm not on camera. And I don't. Since in the last several years, especially, I don't talk to people. I just email with them. So
Right, exactly. Well, and I mean, we're basically meeting for the first time because we've been emailing back and forth. And so, like I
I think I
said,
know a lot about you, but
you know
yeah,
a ton about, you know more about me. So I'll tell you really quickly. So as we're recording this, the book designer has gotten back the first draft of the design. And so I'm letting a few friends read it over, kind of like, okay, we've had all kinds of people look for typos and all kinds of stuff. Can you look through this and see what you think? And then I have one friend, she said, I've known you for 20 years and there are some stories in here that I have never heard before. So, so you know more about me than friends that I've had for decades.
well, that's good. That's fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I know that, that this is an experiment. Tammy, this is how I've explained it to people, is that it's my experiment. I'm publishing my memoir and to really delve into the book industry because I've done media for so long and I've written I've written columns, I've written news, and to write my own book, I think is a challenge I wanted to take on myself. So anyway, so I know that based on what you just said, like, hey, I work behind the scenes. Most people in publishing work behind the scenes. They don't get in front of cameras and microphones. So I truly thank you for being a part of this. So explain to people what you do, a book editor. What does that mean?
Oh, it can be everything from what most people think of when they think of editors is like fixing the typos, finding the periods, making sure the punctuation is all correct, making sure everything's spelled correctly. That is kind of what I consider the last level of editing. That's more of the proofreading part of the editing. Editing can be everything from starting with working with a person that says, I have this idea for a book, but I'm not quite sure how to get it started. And we sit down and we just talk about how would you go about this? How would you frame it? How would you frame your story? What would you talk about? To doing more like what I did with you. You already had your story pretty much told. You had the framework, you had the setting, you had you had sketched it all out. You had it into sections. You had a really good vision of what you wanted to accomplish with your book. What I did with your book was come in and make it read well. I think with
you can say make it better. You can say make it better.
Well, I don't think that. To me, it's like you're used to talking, so the stuff that you put on the paper is the stuff that sounds in your head. It's the stuff that you would say if you were talking to somebody. But what it's harder to do when you're a reader is to pick up that, and you're not listening, you're trying to read the sentences. And sometimes it's like finding, okay, where does this sentence end? Where does this idea start? How does this phrase connect with that phrase? And so that's for me. I consider myself an advocate for the reader. I consider myself a bridge between the writer and the reader. It's like, okay, what do you want to say? And what is the reader going to see? And how do we bridge those two?
I love that. I had explained in previous videos about what I hired you to do and what you did so successfully, which is tell me when something's not working. You told me things to take out of the book. And like I said, I have friends that are trying to look at the final typos and stuff. But again, that's the majority of what you did was exactly what you just explained, which is like, for instance, I know that my chapters were kind of short because, again, I'm not a literary author traditionally. And so I never thought about it the way you explained it. But it's true. It was like I was giving a speech. Right. So I was doing a monologue instead of writing literature. And you came to me and said, well, the chapters were uneven. So you were like, well, let's work on that a little bit. So, I mean, you put a tremendous amount of work in structuring this. And is this something is that a part you enjoy in this, or is that a necessary evil?
Oh, that's the best part. That's the most fun part. I mean, just looking for typos and stuff is not the most fun part of editing. The part of editing is like helping someone express themselves. It's like hearing their voice. And this is This is something that it's just, it's taken me decades to develop, but I can hear a writer's voice. I hear the author's voice and can, make what comes out sound like them. And it can be a very, very different kind of thing. So I work with you. I work with a professor who's like writing for a PhD audience. It's going to be a completely different kind of work. But that interpretation part, I mean, it's exciting. It's fun because I do feel like I get to know all of these people and all of these things about their lives and what makes them tick and how does this work and that work. And yeah, it's fascinating. It's fascinating work.
And you have to be incredibly intelligent to be able to do helps a PhD write a PhD type, literature come to me and it be a little more simplistic and then go to somebody else who may have, fiction or whatever. So what is your background? I know your background, but explain to people what your background is and what brought you to this profession.
Well, first of all, I want to say I don't really work with fiction authors for the most part. The only kind of work I do with fiction authors is like the proofreading part. I can do that part because I'm not trained in fiction. What I realized pretty early is like I can see when something's wrong with fiction, but not necessarily know how to correct it. Gotcha. My background is all in journalism. I went to school, got a degree in print. I worked 10 years in daily newspapers and print journalism. I know you're in Atlanta, right? So yes. I worked for I guess 6 or 7 years in Austin, Texas, but I was working for the Cox newspaper
Cox Media Group,
when Cox owned the Austin paper. So there was a lot of Atlanta back
She's
and forth.
pointing at me because I worked for Cox at one of their radio stations. So yes, we're both former Cox employees. But
there you go.
Yeah, but Peter Bowerman, who is an author who helps writers self-publish, it recommended you. He lives in Atlanta, and so I'm glad that I got the recommendation. And I'll include his book in the description. But I was, again, wanting to do this myself because of my background. One of the reasons I connected with you is because of your journalism background. We spoke the same language. And I think that for me, I had the confidence knowing, well, I've done enough media, I've done enough writing, I had the confidence going in knowing I can do something with this. And and the story of my medical journey I thought was important enough to tell. But I know that there's probably a lot of other authors out there, and I've cautioned them. Tammy, I promise I've cautioned them not to do this. But there's a lot of other authors out there who want to self-publish because it's becoming more accessible to do that. It's becoming more acceptable to do that. But a lot of them are like, you know what? I can edit my own work. I can do it myself. What do you say? I know what you want to say behind the scenes, but what would you say respectfully on camera to those authors who feel like, why should I waste my money on someone who may change what I'm doing?
Number one, if you find a good editor, they will make you better. They're not going to tell you, oh, you can't do what you just did. You can't, this is all wrong. That's not going to be the kind of editor you want to work with. What I think the main thing is that what I said before, it's like an editor can be an advocate for a reader. It's like you read your work because you've written it. It's been in your head for years and years and years. It's been in your head as you're writing it. You see what's on the screen. You see what you know is in your head, but you don't see what another reader might see. It's like a reader picks this up and is like, I don't know where this starts. I feel like I'm in the middle of a story because I can't tell where the beginning is. Or like, I think as you mentioned chapters, it's like the first parts of your book, there were 2 or 3 chapters that were really short. And then there was some that just went on for like, 13, 40, 40 pages or so. So it's like, wait, so if I'm, as a reader, I'm picking this up, I'm getting used to getting through, okay, I can get through 2 or 3 chapters, before bedtime. And then all of a sudden I'm reading through this chapter and it just keeps going and going and going. And as a reader, I'm like, what's going on here? Those are the kinds of things that authors don't think about most of the time unless they've been writing for a long time. Yeah. So that's just one of those things. And just the idea of advocating for the reader. That's what I would say again. As an editor, I feel like I'm an advocate for the reader, and I'm going to come to you and say, you mentioned this as being really important, but I don't see where you explain it. It's like that's there's something that's missing. There's a piece here that just leaves me with a lot of questions. And that's the kind of thing that you just don't see for yourself when you're writing your own book. It's really, really hard.
That's such a great point. I didn't think about the fact you're right. You get into a rhythm. And I've said this, you look, I've done, Tammy, I've done several videos and I say you get into a rhythm with writing. And then I didn't think about that I've had books, and even when I read books with my son, and it's like, oh, I'm used to the chapter being so long, so I know the timing of, like you said, before bed is usually when you read.
Right.
And if and then there'll be times where my son will be like, well, how long is this chapter? That if somebody's been inconsistent with it,
Yeah.
something else that I cannot thank Tammy enough for is chapter titles. I mean, you helped me with that. That was something that I am not used to doing. But it's funny how when you read a book, I now appreciate reading a book
Mhm.
much better than I did before, having gone through writing this book and working with you. So when you read a book, is it hard to let go of the editing? Uh, it is. Yeah,
Yeah.
I figure that same with me, if I hear a podcast or I hear somebody, I'm like, oh, this is what I would do differently. So
Can be. I mean, sometimes I can just. It's not hard. People are like always when they find out I'm an editor. I'm like, oh, you're correcting my grammar silently. I'm like, no, I'm not. No, it's like you're not paying me to do that. I'm not doing that. It's
right,
like
right,
I do
right.
that because I'm paid to. But it's hard for me to read. I picked up a novel a few years ago that was like one. It was like very very popular and had lots of great reviews. And there was part of the basis of the novel or something was like somebody was reading somebody else's diary entries, and that's how they were understanding. But the diary entries were like massively long, and the diary entries were describing how somebody spoke, and the diary entries were, I was like, nobody writes a diary like that. And
Right.
I could not get past it. I just had to put the book down. I'm like, surely an editor mentioned this just doesn't work. Nobody writes in their journal that, oh, he crossed the room and sat on the table. I'm like, that's
Right.
not a diary entry. It's not right.
Maybe
So
from the 1800s when they had all day to maybe do some prose in there. But well,
yeah.
I'm going to ask you some of your favorite books. I'm going to give you a second to think, your favorite books that you've just read, and maybe a favorite book that you've edited,
Oh, okay.
because my last comment is the fact that my understanding now of books too, the biggest lesson, which I kind of knew already, but it really brought it home with writing this, is the fact that no book is written by one person.
Yeah,
That it's the person had the idea, so the author should be given total credit for creating something. However,
absolutely.
the editor had a huge part in it. Again, the book designer had a huge part in it. Both the cover designer and the interior, the friends that read it, the book groups that read it, the writers groups that read it. I don't think people realize how much that thing has been looked at
Yeah,
before it's ever published.
that's true.
And so I think that it's a shame that an editor's name is in where the trademark is.
Right.
And so do you ever find that you wish you got more credit for the work you do on books?
No, not really. It's an interesting thing, and occasionally I will, because I'm like, I work with some people very regularly, and I'm like, I've had a big hand in what they've done. Some of the authors I work with, I do a lot of editing and a lot of rewriting and revising, but I don't find that I'm like, oh, I should be getting credit for that, because she comes to me with the ideas, she does the interviews, she does the research, and I'm happy to let her do that. I feel like a lot of times I like to work with the words, so I just like, she gets to focus on the ideas, she gets to go find the things she wants to talk about, she does all of those kinds of things, and I just get to work with the words, and I find that really, I'm satisfied by that. And
Yeah.
yeah, very rarely do I find myself going, wow, I wish I got some more credit for that. For the most part, I'm happy to work kind of in the background. I guess that's a good thing, but
Yeah.
because that's where I'm at. Yeah.
I'm about to put you back in the background. Don't worry. The interview's almost over. I bless Tammy, because I love the fact that you did this. You're the first to do it. This part of the book, but the invitations have gone out to others. So you're not the only one behind the scenes to do this.
Okay,
Um,
good.
Yeah. So let me ask, what is the favorite book that you have edited, post edit, that, because I'm sending you a copy of my book. I'm assuming every author sends you a copy of the book that you worked on. So
I get most, yeah, I do most of them. And I thank you. I appreciate that. Because, yeah, sometimes this is the one thing that I do find kind of irritating is that sometimes authors, it's like once I work with them, they seem to forget that I'm here. I don't want to get all the credit, but it's like, yeah, could you send me a copy of that book, or could you let me know when it's published, or some of that? That would be nice to know. That would be nice. So
yeah,
that's the only time that I get a little,
that's a
my nose out of
shame.
joint a little bit. But
Oh
yeah,
no, I get foot. Look, no man is an island, right? So I
yeah.
mean, again, this book has been written by been come to fruition through several people, and you're one of the most important people that helped me because you knew this when going in. I didn't have the experience of doing something this long form. I've never done something this long before, and so hopefully it'll be something that people enjoy. So again, is there a book that you've edited that you loved when you're
One
done?
of the books I've edited that I love, it's kind of a niche book, but so my husband works at Pepperdine. He's a professor at Pepperdine. He's at university out here in Malibu. He's been here for 31 years. I've worked for Pepperdine off and on in different kinds of capacities. Both of my kids went to Pepperdine, so our lives have been kind of Pepperdine over the last 30 years. And they like a former dean was writing a history of Pepperdine, and
Uh-huh.
he had thought he would get it done. He was a history professor. When he retired, he's like, okay, I'll pull this together in like 3 years. And it had been 7, and he had written like what would have been like a 3,000 word book or a 3,000 page book, and nobody wanted to touch it at that point. And so we worked together to bring it down to like a little under 1,000 pages. It
Okay.
was still a very massive book, but he had done all the research, and he had like, just tons and tons of primary sources and letters and, meeting minutes and all of this. And he, even as a history professor who's written a lot of books, he was really struggling with how to frame it. What do
Mhm.
we focus on? And so we worked together, and that was fascinating. It was fascinating just to learn the history of an institution that, I'm so involved in anyway, but
Yeah.
also just to and he was very grateful and very appreciative, and as always, like giving me credit for that. And so that's been fun. That was probably my favorite. I worked with another a friend, or who has now become a friend, a client who has become a friend, who lived like 6 blocks from the World Trade Center when
Oof.
9/11 happened. And so I helped her with a memoir on that, of her experiences on that day and through that time period. That was a really very interesting book to work on. Um,
And I love that it reminded me of one thing else that you helped me with. And if you're an author, this will help you too, is because I mentioned 9/11 in my book because I was on the air. And throughout the book, Tammy kept saying, when did this happen? What was the date of this? What year did you do this? And so again, it's one of those things when you're an author, especially a new author, and you're putting these ideas, but nobody's a mind reader. And she's like, people have to hang on to something and know this timeline. And so you really helped me. And there were some things I had to Google and go, wait a second, I don't even remember what year this was. But so not to interrupt you, but that's something else that you helped with is those things that authors may not think about that readers will. And like you said, you're an advocate for the reader. And so, there's a lot of dates in there that I did not include. So thank
yeah.
Tammy when you read it I'm not lost, because you would have been lost had I not hired Tammy. So
Right. Well, I will tell you this. I think memoir is one of the hardest things to write. I really do. Everybody thinks, oh, I can just write my story, but it's really not that easy. It's so much harder. And when you start telling your stories, it's like, well, do I include every birthday? Do I include from the beginning? How do I go from here to there? And is it all chronological? Or I mean, that's what a lot of people get bogged down trying to do it, and they start trying to do it, and they start trying to do it chronologically and telling every little thing that was going on and how it was going on. And you did a great job of like, okay, it's more thematic. Like, we're going
mhm.
to focus on these. There's like 3 or 4 very important themes that come through the book. Your career, your health, other things like that. And that you did a great job of that, of pulling that through.
Oh, well, thank you. Well, that's probably my broadcast training of telling a story. And,
Yeah.
I
Tell a story, right?
I was still a little long winded with the story in some places, but, because I mentioned earlier that Tammy had suggested things that to come out of the book. And so I want to just address that really quickly for authors who are like, well, see, I told you she's trying. No, Tammy kept my voice throughout the book. And the things that she told me to take out were things that didn't belong, that would have been like all of a sudden momentum stopper for the reader. So again, Tammy's not there to tell the author you're doing something wrong. Tammy's there to say the reader would feel this way about this. So it's your decision on whether you keep it or not. And I immediately took it out because the point is to communicate with the reader effectively, not to feed my own ego or need to tell, whatever. So, all right. So I'm going to let you go, Tammy. You've done phenomenal, and that's the best sweater ever. So, but I am curious from it.
I almost wore my UT sweater, my real UT.
Is that where we're going? Are we going?
Well,
you lived in Austin?
That is the Dodgers. I could have had my Dodgers jersey on too at this point. But,
now that they're both in the SEC, you talk about confusion for people. But
I know it is very confusing. Yeah.
Yeah, Tennessee was there first. So anyway, so from yours, again, you're an editor, you've been a journalist, but I just love hearing people from different backgrounds what their favorite books were. So you don't have to do one because it's impossible for me to say. But what are the first books that come to mind that you would recommend to somebody who may say, I've never read that before?
The first one is a book by Marilynne Robinson, and now I'm Gilead. It's the first of a four books that she wrote. And I find it a fascinating book, and I have friends who think it's just so boring. And I've read it like 4 or 5 times, and so I find it fascinating. But that's one of my favorites. I'm rereading now for the first time in a while, but Annie Dillard's Pilgrim at Tinker Creek. Okay. If you've ever read that, it's naturalist, but it's just and in both Marilynne Robinson's is fiction and the Pilgrim at Tinker Creek, but both of them are just full of just description and this idea that gets you to look at the world in new light and new ways and open your eyes up to that. So those are two of my favorites that just come to me off the top of my head. I might have come up with different ideas if
I didn't give her I put her on the spot. I didn't give her any notice on that. And I will put links to both those books in the description. And Tammy, I don't know if you're available, but if somebody who is an author who needs an editor who writes nonfiction, because you don't do fiction, are you available, and how would they get in touch with you to find out more?
Check out my website is editmore.com, editmore.com. So just www.editmore.com. You've got a contact links on there. It's got my email addresses. Everything is right there. I'm usually booked up a couple of months in advance, but so don't wait until the last second. But if you email me, we can 2 to 3 months ahead, and we can kind of work things out and see how it works.
I've tried to tell people to give themselves plenty of time. I gave myself plenty of time with this book because I don't plan on publishing this till the spring of 25. So so that I could take all the mistakes and figure out what I'm doing. And let me tell you this real quick, Tim, before I let you go. So the book editor, talking about being an advocate for the reader. So or the book designer, I should say, the book designer, she said, well, hey, I may do a mimic the cover of the book in the first page. So would you send me the book cover? And I did. And she was like, I hesitate to tell you this, but she didn't like the book cover. And it wasn't that it was a bad book cover. It just didn't relate to what was inside. And I had this idea for a book cover before I wrote the book.
There you go.
And then I was like, well, let me talk to the guy that did my logo and see what he thinks, since he's, an artist. And so I sent it to him. He's not the one that did the design, but I sent it to him, and he was like, you know what? I hate to say it, but I agree with her. So we're redoing the book cover right now.
Now that is a kind of author that most editing and professionals want to work with. You'll listen. It's like,
right.
We have ideas, and we have ideas because we've done this for a long time, most of us.
Exactly.
So, listen and hear, that's a great idea. Just listen. It's like, well, what do you think? I will also say this as an advocate for authors and people who are, going out there looking for an editor. If your editor is not collaborating with you and coming to you saying, I don't know about this. I think this might work better this way, or this might work better this way. But it's your book. Obviously, this is your book. I mean, if you're in a traditional publishing situation, that's a different kind of thing. But if you are working with an editor who's just like black and white, this is the way it has to be. You can never do it this way. You can never do it that way. Everything has to be just exactly this way. You probably should look for a different editor. I mean, you probably don't want to be in that kind of situation. You want to be in a situation with an editor who wants to collaborate with you. That's what you're supposed to be doing. And a designer, and cover designer, interior designer. Everybody should be working together for one purpose.
Right. Well, and I think that as an author, you have to decide what you want out of it. And so it's, and I've worked in media all my life, and I've seen plenty of egos, and I've had an ego plenty of times. But I think at the end of the day, it's like, well, what do you want out of this? And if you want it to be solid, and in my case, I want it to be like, this is my experiment, so let me do the best I can with it. And it's a self-published book, so let me make sure that it's as good a quality as a big publishing house would have done. Then I have to listen to the people I've hired to help me out. So, and Tammy Ditmore is one of those. And Tammy, you did great. And thank you so much for being a part of this interview. And now you can go behind the scenes again.
All right. Thank you.